Welcome to Middle Creek Wildlife Management Area. My name is Lauren, and we're going to be taking you on a guided tour of the Visitor Center today. First, we're going to start outside. Middle Creek is actually owned and operated by the Pennsylvania Game Commission. We are Pennsylvania's state wildlife agency in charge of managing all wild birds and wild mammals. The Visitor Center is a very important place to the Game Commission, as it is one of our only visitor centers that we have in the state. Today we're going to talk about what you can do here at Middle Creek, and as I mentioned, give you an inside tour. Outside here first though, we have a wildlife lending library that when you're on property you can come and read some books, return them back at the kiosk when you're done. Just gives another avenue for people to learn while they're here at the center. And also we have the kiosk that's outside of the Visitor Center that talks about our hiking trails and general information about Middle Creek, including our activities and events that are coming up and other things that you can enjoy seeing on the property. Follow me, we're going to go inside the center and we're going to take a look at all the other things that you can do while you're here. The education starts at our front doors of our visitor center. First, let's talk about when we're open. So we are open from Tuesday through Saturday from 8 to 4, Sunday from 12 to 5, and we are closed on Mondays. We are also seasonally closed from Thanksgiving to February 1st. Looking at the front doors of the center, you might notice that there are coverings on the windows. This is a product called Kaleidoscapes, which actually helps to prevent bird strikes, which are cause of a lot of bird declines in the state and responsible for up to 1 billion bird deaths a year. At Middle Creek, we try to do our part to make sure that we can reduce the risk of birds from our center. With that being said, let's go through the doors and see the rest of the center. So the education starts right when you enter our doors. We have a kiosk where you can submit any wildlife sightings or see the sightings of others while they've been at Middle Creek. You can sign in to our visitor login, or you can sign up to be a volunteer. And eventually, you can make a donation if you feel that you want to donate to wildlife and conservation. As you come through the doors here though, this is the main room where we talk a lot about wildlife adaptations, and you can also greet and meet our staff that are at the front desk here, pick up any trail maps or any other information as it relates to our programs and events that are happening at Middle Creek throughout the year. So as I mentioned, this area of the Visitor Center really focuses in on wildlife adaptations. So with this display here specifically, we're talking about beaks of birds and how each beak characteristic allows that bird to find its food. So if I were a bird like a heron who really relies on fish, my beak would be more of a piercing method where they would actually try to pierce their prey. So let's see if I can actually try to catch a fish here. Got him. So you have the piercers or the predators of fish. You have the plant-specific hosts like ducks. And then you have other bill types which are focused on picking up seeds and other things like cardinals might be. So each individual station allows you to explore what type of beaks are out there on a lot of our different birds. And then over here, you can see that this actually will talk a little bit more about what bills are out there and what they're used for. So in this case, a ripping bill is meant for eating meat of birds, mammals, reptiles, and fish. This is something that you might see in our national symbol, like the bald eagle, but you can see that there are other types of bills as well that would be used for finding food. So the next display we're going to talk about is adaptations for feet of birds as well. So if you look at this one a little bit closer, you can see that there's different types of feet that birds use to help them do different functions. For example, climbers like woodpeckers might look a little bit different than other birds that just use their feet for perching on trees. But then you have other birds like waders, like we mentioned with herons, runners as well, like pheasants that you could see on the landscape, scratchers, like wild turkeys that find their food in the soils, and then swimmers, like we have a lot here at Middle Creek with ducks and other waterfowl species. Finally, you can kind of see what it looks like to have a leg of a bird and how it all kind of ties together. So it is similar to the foot and the leg system of a human, but a lot different function. So you can kind of see how those feet are used for actually grasping and gripping onto perches. So the next thing that you can learn about is tracks and sign of wildlife that's out on the landscape. So each one of these areas has a type of imprint that is raised off of the display that allows people to run these pencils over them to see what a track might look like. So you can see I just put a beaver foot on this piece of paper, and some other people had put some different designs on here as well. It allows you to see what animal footprints and tracks would look like out on the landscape. But you can also see what some of the other signs that might be out there are. So for example, at Middle Creek, we have a lot of goose scat on the property and other waterfowl that might leave some different indications of they've been here behind. Turkey scat is another example, some stashing of red squirrels or other types of rodents. And then you can actually look at how to create your own wildlife journal here. So this is just an example of some of the things that you can do when you're out on the property here and observing all the wildlife that might be here. And you can even take your tracks with you to check on what you find when you're out there. One of the final parts of the adaptations for all wildlife here focuses on teeth. So you and I have teeth just like wildlife does, and our teeth are specific to what we eat. So this display really focuses on looking at what wildlife eats on the landscape. So for example, a bobcat, which we know as a carnivore, meaning that it eats only meat, has a different set of dentition than what you would see for a beaver, which is an herbivore and only eats plants. And each one of these cards that slides out talks about what an herbivore or a carnivore eat, and then in case of a black bear, eating both meat and other berries and fruits, what it looks like to have their dentition because of what they eat. So when you're here, make sure you compare your teeth to the other critters that are here and see what you have in common with them. We hope that you get a real hoot out of our final display we're going to show you, talking about wildlife adaptations. And that is focused solely on owls of Middle Creek. So as you run down this display, you can see there's different things that owls have to help them survive on the landscape. So first, we talk about calls and communication, and you can hear what some of the owls sound like on the property. So that's a great horned owl. Next, you can learn a little bit more about why owls have silent flight, which helps them to hunt. And then you can also test your grip strength, like that of the great horned owl, to see if you're stronger than what a great horned owl is. And finally, we start moving into why owls have such large eyes and can actually turn their head 270 degrees, which allows you to kind of see how far they can turn their head with this monitor that we have here, and the cameras behind you as you're looking at the display. And the final part is talking about when they're hunting, those eyes really help them out with that, but how their ears are actually on two different planes that really helps them to triangulate into an area. And you can kind of test to see how their ears are like focusing on their prey. Pretty cool. When you're visiting Middle Creek, we really want you to get your hands on things. So with this display, we talk about what some of our mammals in Pennsylvania look like. Think that you know all of the mammals in PA? You can test your knowledge right here. So for example, if you're wondering what this is, if you said red fox, maybe you're right. This will actually tell us if we're correct. And we are. So this display actually allows you to touch and feel all the different pelts and test your knowledge about what mammals we have in Pennsylvania at the same time. If you find yourself at Middle Creek needing a little bit of a rest and you have little ones with you, come check out the Kids Corner. This area is just a resting area for anybody that's coming to visit Middle Creek. We have some books that they can read, some coloring pages, some beanbag chairs, and then also you can really just take a seat and watch one of our live wildlife cams that we have right now, which is the bald eagle cam, which is pretty cool. So after you had a chance to look at all of the displays talking about all of the different adaptations that wildlife have, you can make your way into the viewing area, which allows you to see most of Middle Creek Lake and the bird feeders and the pollinator gardens that we have on the property here. You might notice the dots on the glass. And we had a conversation before about the bird safe glass that we have at the visitor center. These dots are called feather friendly, and it allows people who are viewing the area outside to see more clearly than that of the kaleidoscapes that was on the other side of the door. So when you come in here, make sure you take a look at some of the birds that are using the bird feeding areas. So some of the other things that you can do when you're in the viewing area is take a look at the walls behind you. So all of these critters here on the wall represent the raptors of Pennsylvania, and also in the cases the shorebirds too. So take a closer peek at some of the wildlife that you can see on the landscape here at Middle Creek. And at the same time, you can come and see a 3D map that we have of the property that gives you a little bit more acquainted with where you're at without actually being outside before you go out to check out the property. So after viewing the wildlife viewing area, you can come around the corner and come into the other side of the visitor center where we talk a lot about waterfowl, which is what Middle Creek was actually built for. So this first display talks about what biologists on the property do to help study the wildlife and the waterfowl specifically when they're here. So if you were watching this video, you can actually push this button to watch one of our biologists talk about wildlife and waterfowl banding. But we also have a display here to show you all the tools of the trade that we use while we're out on the property. While you're at Middle Creek, you might notice that there are some structures outside of the visitor center that are homes for wildlife. This display talks about those structures and specifically about what they're for waterfowl. So if you look at the structure over here, we have a nesting tube that we call it, and this is actually used for mallards, one of the most common species of duck here in Pennsylvania. We have a wood duck nest box, another common species in Pennsylvania, and then finally a goose nesting tub, which you'll see throughout the property as well. So if you listen to our wildlife biologist talk about waterfowl banding, you might have heard him talk about what the wings look like. This display helps you to figure out what duck you're looking at based on what the wing actually looks like. And you can even come here and feel one of the waterfowl wings and get an idea of what the feathers are on each wing that helps a biologist determine what species of duck it is, how old it is, and if it's a boy or a girl. If you've been to Middle Creek before, you know that we're a popular destination for snow geese, one of the most populated waterfowl species in the world. So how do biologists actually count them? This display walks you through how we go about counting the snow geese while they're at Middle Creek using a diagram that you can actually use yourself to figure out how many snow geese are on this photo. Continuing the conversation about waterfowl, you learned about banding before. This display actually talks about why wildlife biologists band waterfowl. So when you're at Middle Creek, make sure you grab a small scorecard and a little pencil, and keep your eye out throughout the rest of the video and the other displays for little ducks that you might see on the walls here at Middle Creek. Some of them are banded, some of them are not, just like the ducks that wildlife biologists find out on the landscape. But you can come back here and then check your answers to see if you found them all. Want to learn how you measure up to some of our birds at Middle Creek? You can actually see how wide your wingspan is compared to some of the animals that we have here at Middle Creek. I'm almost a tundra swan. So while you're here, you'll learn even more about the different ducks that we have here at Middle Creek, and you can even create your own duck. So each one of these kiosks has a different lesson that you can learn, and on this one specifically, you can actually create a duck that might exist out on the landscape, and it'll tell you what you've created. The next kiosk takes you through a little bit of a trivia when it comes to your duck knowledge. So you can click on that, start your quiz, and there's a series of 5 questions that this will take you through. All of these questions you can learn someplace here in the visitor center. And then finally, the next screen takes you through a closer look at Middle Creek, and it goes into a lot of in-depth information about what wildlife and habitat management we do on the property to make sure that Middle Creek stays a safe place for all those wildlife that can be found here. So you can click on a spot such as number 1 on this map, which is very close to the visitor center, and it talks to you specifically about waterfowl habitat that you can see on the property. Or you can look at somewhere else on the property to learn more about the other wildlife that we manage here throughout the year. In this case, grass and nesting birds. So while you're here, make sure you take a peek at this and see what other wildlife you might see while you're on the property and why that wildlife's there. So these displays will actually introduce you to the fact that waterfowl are known as game species, meaning that they can be hunted. So we have a variety of decoys here that will help you test your knowledge on making sure you know what type of duck looks how it does. For when you're hunting, you want to make sure you can identify your target. So these cards here will help you guess as to what duck we're talking about. So if you come a little bit closer, it says this duck got its name from its wide spoon-shaped bill used for sifting plants and small aquatic organisms from the shallow water. Drakes meaning males, have a dark green head, white breast, and a chestnut belly and sides. So if we're looking at these different critters that we have here, we're trying to find the one that has a spoon-shaped bill, a green head, and a white breast. Looks like that could probably be the northern shoveler drake, meaning the male northern shoveler. So if I think that I'm right, I can come over here and, similar to the red fox, test my knowledge and put this down, and it'll tell me that it was the shoveler drake. So we got that right. So we mentioned previously that waterfowl are game species, meaning they can be hunted. So this display talks about what is a bag limit, meaning how many ducks you can harvest at one given time. Based on the parameters and the laws that are listed on the display, you can actually check to see if what your bag limit that you harvested was legal. So if we pick this one, it'll say, this harvest is legal, congratulations. One more way that you can test your knowledge of all the waterfowl species we have here in Pennsylvania. So you've learned a lot about waterfowl, you've learned a little bit about waterfowl hunting. The next display allows you to have a virtual experience of what it looks like to go on a waterfowl hunt. I'm not going to push this button, but if you do, it'll show you what it's like to actually go hunting while here at Middle Creek. And then you can also go on a virtual experience in one of our hunting blinds that we have here on the property. By stepping foot through this door here, you can actually go on a hunt with one of our waterfowl biologists and our staff here while you're at Middle Creek. So after you've had your fill of learning about waterfowl, you round the corner and you come into the front part of the visitor center where you entered the building. But the education continues. So this display talks about different nests and eggs that birds have, and you can actually test your knowledge to see if you can get things right. So this case holds your key to make sure that you can check your knowledge, and you can actually go through here and guess at what bird is what, and you can see what their nest looks like, and eventually just look at the eggs and see if you can figure out what egg belongs to what bird. For example, do you know what an ostrich egg looks like compared to a hummingbird egg? Here you can actually see the size difference between an ostrich egg and the tiniest egg that we have in one of our cases with the hummingbird. The learning opportunities even continue. In the bathrooms? Follow me. Middle Creek is very fortunate to have a talented bunch of photographers that have donated some of their photos for educational purposes in the restrooms. While you're using the bathrooms, you can learn more about the wildlife that uses Middle Creek by reading the words on the back of the restroom doors. We also have a unisex and accessible restroom for families or individuals to utilize while they're here. While visiting Middle Creek, make sure you check out the middle of the visitor center, what we call our auditorium space. This area is used for public events such as our speaker series and other types of educational events throughout the year. There's also a beautiful mural that has been painted in the auditorium that was done by one of the local technology centers. So make sure you check it out before you leave. If you're interested in any of our public events and our speaker series, you can find that information on our website at pgc.pa.gov. While you're visiting Middle Creek, make sure you take a look at the Conservation Heritage Museum that can be found through these doors. Thank you for taking a tour with us through the Middle Creek Wildlife Management Area Visitor Center. We hope to see you in person here soon.